Good evening. How's everybody doing? We're working our way through that Hallel that Moshe Storch led us in on Hoshana Rabbah, but especially appropriate today when it's Rosh Chodesh, it's still Rosh Chodesh for a few more minutes here in LA, the beginning of the month of Heshvan, sometimes called Mar Heshvan, a month that often is associated with troubles. May we soon see the end of these terrible, terrible troubles. Let us light up the darkness. Who's in the house on Monday? Yom Sheni. Sharon in New Jersey, Joe in the Inland Empire, Shandor in the Bronx, Stephen in New Hampshire, Paula in Chicago, Yehuda in South Carolina, Melissa in Great Neck, Paul in the Great Northwest, Nancy in North Carolina, Leona Sue in Illinois, Bell in Florida, Bill in mid-Missouri, Guy in Ohio, and Aoife in Florida, Lynn in Maryland, Marjorie in Georgia. Hello from San Pedro. It's Frank. Welcome, Frank. And Marie in Freeport. Welcome, everybody. Let's do our job. I'll tell you something. I got a call from my son today in Jerusalem. So, he's there. He's learning in the yeshiva. And the boys are staying pretty close to the yeshiva. But they're also going out to do chesed, projects of loving kindness. So one thing they were doing is there's a family. The father has been called in from the reserve. He's fighting in the war. He's got a bunch of kids at home. The mom is a bit overwhelmed. So the 4 boys from the yeshiva, they went, just to take the boys out of the house, play some sports with them in a park, in a Jewish neighborhood in Jerusalem. And while they were there, the siren went off. They needed to get to shelter. The boys were not familiar with this neighborhood. One of the little boys that they were watching said, I know where to go. And he led them and they followed the boy. It was his neighborhood. Well, where he took them was just some boulders in the middle of the park, and they kind of crouched on the ground under the shelter of these boulders. And while they were crouched there, they very soon after heard a massive boom, really loud. Ground shook like in an earthquake. And my son told me it was scary as heck. It was very real. Later it turned out that hearing the booms, in times like this, it's the rockets being destroyed by Iron Dome. Sometimes a rocket gets through, and it got through today, and it fell. Thank God no one was killed. It kind of landed on a hillside. But okay, my son experienced that today. So listen, and then he and I were talking, and we were talking about this idea. I think I've mentioned it before, right? We're all now, everyone who cares about Israel and peace in Israel, so we're all in the army. Some are fighting with rifles on the front. Some are doing chesed projects, watching the kids of those who can't watch because they're off to war. Some are serving in hospitals. Some are cooking food. Some are sending supplies to the front. Some are praying, and some are learning Torah. Right? We all have our post. We all have our post. We got to stand our post in this effort. And please God, may peace be restored soon, a secure and lasting peace. We say amen. So let's stand our post. Let's learn. Our daf today is page 62. Here we go. Page Samech Vav, page Samech Bet, base. So we're picking this right at the bottom, at the top of page 62a, and we're in chapter 3, and we've been discussing Mishna number 4 here in chapter 3. And the idea here in this Mishnah is this idea that conditions are doubled, right? So if you say, like the children of Gad and the children of Reuben, who were just about to enter the promised land, and they said to Moses, we'd like to stay here, But we will fight alongside our brothers and sisters as they enter the conquest of the Holy Land from the 7 Canaanite nations. And Moses said, okay, so if you fight alongside your brothers and sisters, as you promised, then when the wars are over, then you can have this land on the east of the Jordan. But if you don't fight alongside them, you will not have this land. You'll inherit some portion on the other side, along with the others. And from this we learn that a legally binding condition needs to be doubled. And this is the opinion of Rabbi Meir, and that's the law. To create a legally binding condition, you say, if you do such and such, then this will be the result. And if you do not do such and such, then this will be the result. Right? That's what it takes to state both the positive and negative outcomes of a condition that one is proposing. And then Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel says, well, in that case, Moses needed to specify what would happen if they fought alongside and what would happen if they didn't, because the negative outcome is not naturally the opposite of the positive. There could have been other results that would have been implied by those tribes not fighting alongside the other tribes in the conquest, and we wouldn't know. So that's why it needed to be stated explicitly. But in a situation where, if you say, like, if you do this job, I'll give you $20, and it's obvious that if you don't do the job, I won't give you $20, that then it doesn't need to be stated. But that's the minority opinion of Hanina ben Gamliel, and we follow Rabbi Meir, who says to create a legally binding condition, you have to state both sides, the positive and negative. Okay, so the Gemara asks, and then we've been looking at different situations in the Bible where, the double condition, the positive and the negative, were stated. For example, when Eliezer went off to find a wife for Abraham's son Yitzhak, and if she will come with me and her family will agree, then okay. But if she won't come, then you will be absolved of this mission, said Abraham to his servant Eliezer. So examples like that. So we continue. Now, granted, according to the opinion of Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel, who says you don't need the double condition, well, according to him, this is the reason that it is written in the verses of the Sota, the suspected adulteress in the Torah, in Numbers 5:19, if no man has lain with you, and if you have not gone aside to uncleanness, being under your husband, you shall be free, hinaki, without specifying the negative side of the condition, right? That the verse would have said, and if you have committed adultery, then when you drink these bitter waters, you're going to die, right? It only says, well, if you have not committed adultery, then these waters will enter into you and they will not harm you. Right? So it seems like this would be support for the opinion of Hanina ben Gamliel, right? Where it wasn't doubled in the Torah. But according to the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who says you do need to double, the verse should have stated, and if a man has lain with you, you should choke. Chenaki, right? A different word. Not hinaki, you will be free. Chenaki, you will choke on those waters and you will die. So according to the opinion of Rabbi Meir, the verse should have clarified the other side of the condition and its ensuing punishment. So Rabbi Tanchum said, indeed, a truncated form of the word hinaki, you will be free, was written because it was spelled without the letter yud after the hey, which indicates that the word should be interpreted in two ways, because there's a kind of unusual spelling of the word, missing this yud that's merely implied. From that, we would learn out that it could be both hinaki and chenaki. So therefore, it's teaching us that if you do it, you'll be free, and if you don't do it, you will choke. And the Gemara continues, according to the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who says doubling is needed to create legally binding conditions, this is the reason that it is written hinaki without the yud to allude to the other side of the condition. But then according to the opinion of Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel, Why do I need this word to be written in this odd way? And the Gemara answers, it is necessary, as it might enter your mind, to say, if no man has lain with you, you shall be free. And if he has lain with you, you should neither be free nor choke. Rather, it is merely a prohibition that does not warrant a severe punishment. And the unusual form of the term hinaki teaches us that this is not the case. Now, granted, according to the opinion of Rabbi Meir, this is the reason that it is written with regard, now a different case in the Torah, with regard to one who is being purified with the water of purification. And he's being purified after becoming ritually impure from contact with a corpse. So it says, Numbers 19, 11, and 12, he shall purify himself with it, the waters of purification, on the third day and on the seventh day, and he shall be pure. But if it does not purify himself on the third day and on the seventh day, he shall not be pure. But according to the opinion of Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel, why do I need this double formulation? So the Gemara would answer, well, it's necessary, as it might enter your mind, to think or to say that the mitzvah of sprinkling the water purification must be performed on the third and seventh days, ab initio. That's the correct way to do it. But if he performed it on one of them alone, the ritual would nevertheless be considered performed and the person would be purified after the fact. He didn't do it in the ideal way that purification ritual should be done, but it might be deemed sufficient that he is purified. The verse therefore teaches us that this is not the case. Either he does the sprinkling correctly on the third and seventh days, or he's not purified, period. Right? Either he does it correctly and he is purified, or he doesn't do it correctly and he is not purified. Classic case of the need for doubling and the outcome. Now, the Gemara asks about a later verse in the same chapter. And at Numbers 19:19, and the pure shall sprinkle on the impure on the third day and on the seventh day. So why do I need this repetition of that command that we already learned 7 verses earlier? So the Gemara answers, well, it is necessary, as it might enter your mind to say that the third day excludes the second, i.e. he cannot receive the sprinkling of the water purification before the third day. And similarly, the seventh excludes the sixth day, because he thereby decreases the days of purity before sprinkling. But if he performed the sprinkling on the third and on the eighth days, in which case he increases and adds to the days of purity, you might say that this is proper. The verse therefore comes and teaches us that there must be a fixed interval of 4 days between each sprinkling ritual. You have to do it the right way. And the Gemara further analyzes this verse. Why do I need the phrase, and on the seventh day he shall purify him? That seems like we already said that. And the Gemara answers, it is necessary, as it might enter your mind, to say this matter, i.e. the requirement to receive the sprinkling twice, applies only for eating and touching consecrated meat. But for partaking of teruma, one sprinkling is also sufficient. And the verse therefore teaches us that this is not the case. In other words, if you are impure after having come into contact with the corpse, there's several things that you cannot do, right? A priest or anyone cannot enter the grounds of the temple. Also, you cannot eat consecrated foods. If you are a priest, you can't handle consecrated foods, even if you're not a priest, etc. But it applies to all things. If you're impure, and you're only going to become pure when you do the sprinkling in the correct way. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 4. Here comes Mishnah number 5 of chapter 3. With regard to one who betroths a woman and later says, when I betrothed her, I thought that she was the daughter of a priest, and it turned out that she is the daughter of a Levite. Or if he claims that he thought she was the daughter of a Levite, and she is actually the daughter of a priest. Or if he claims that he thought she was poor and she is wealthy, or wealthy and she is poor, in all of these cases, she is betrothed, right? The assumption that he made that proved to be erroneous is not a reason to retract the betrothal, because why? Because she did not mislead him. And no explicit condition was stated with regard to these matters. She didn't deceive him in any way, right? He just made assumptions about her. His assumptions were wrong, but his assumptions are his problem. It's the classic. Sure, everyone, who's of a certain age has seen this, but just in case you haven't. Right, I first saw this on The Odd Couple so many years ago. Tony Randall, playing Felix Unger, said, when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. No one told you to assume. Your assumption was based on your own ideas. And so you're the one who has to pay the price for that. The Mishnah makes perfect sense. With regard to one who says to a woman, you are hereby betrothed to me after I convert, right? The law of betrothal under Jewish law, this is Jews getting betrothed to other Jews. So if he says, you are hereby betrothed to me after I convert, that means that when he's speaking, he's not a Jew. Presumably he's saying this to a Jewish woman. So he says, you are hereby betrothed to me. Now the couple might say they fall in love and they're going to get married, after he has an Orthodox conversion. But can they create a betrothal, a Kiddushin now before he converts, right? That's the question that's being asked. So he says, one who says to a woman, you are hereby betrothed to me after I convert, or after you convert. Or if he was a Canaanite slave and he says, after I am emancipated. Or if she was a Canaanite maidservant and he says, after you are emancipated. Or if he says to a married woman, you are hereby betrothed to me after your husband dies. Or he says to his wife's sister, after your sister dies. Or if he says to a woman awaiting levirate marriage or chalitza from a brother-in-law who in the opinion of this Tana cannot be betrothed by another man. If he says to her, you are betrothed to me after your yavam performs chalitza for you, in all of these cases, she is not betrothed. Not betrothed. Why? Because he cannot betroth her at the present time. Therefore, his attempt at betrothal is ineffective. And similarly, with regard to one who says to another, if your wife gives birth to a female, the child is hereby betrothed to me. Right? In other words, a father has the right to betroth his daughter. She can later get out of, marrying that guy, but a father can betroth his daughter to another man, even at a young age. She's not going to be permitted to marry him until she's much older. But the father can betroth her to this man. Well, what about before she's even born? Right? So if a man says, okay, so if your wife gives birth to a female, meaning if you have a daughter, right? So he's talking to a man. He says, if your wife gives birth to a female, the child is hereby betrothed to me. Then, even if she becomes pregnant, or she is pregnant at the time he says this, but her pregnancy is not known until later, and then she actually does give birth to the girl, that girl is not betrothed to this man. But interestingly, if the guy says this when the wife of the other man was pregnant and her fetus was discernible at the time, i.e. her pregnancy was known, then this statement is upheld. And therefore, if she gives birth to a girl, that child is betrothed to him, indicating that, the fetus already is a life, that can become betrothed. We don't know if she's a female, right? So there's still that condition that needs to be met. But that the betrothal would work. So that's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. We learned in the Mishnah there, Terumos 1:5, one may not separate teruma from produce that has been detached from the ground, right? Produce that has been harvested stands to be tithed, and teruma is the first of the tithes, the 2% that goes to a priest. So it says that one may not separate teruma from produce that has been detached from the ground in order to render permitted produce that is still attached to the ground. Right? In other words, if a man has harvested half of his wheat field and the other half of the wheat field is still standing in the field, not harvested, and he says, okay, well, from the half that I've harvested, I know how much I'm going to have total when I finish the harvesting. So I'll separate teruma from the pile that I've already harvested, and I'll double it, right? I'll take 2% from what's already harvested. Okay, I get what the 2% is. I'll double that amount, and that'll cover the teruma of the rest of the wheat field after I harvest it. Can you do that? No, because what is not yet detached from the ground does not stand to be tithed, right? It is not fit to be tithed yet. Right? We learned one may not separate teruma from produce that has already been detached from the ground in order to render permitted produce that is still attached to the ground. Produce that is still attached to the ground is not included in the obligation of teruma. It only becomes obligated to separate teruma from it after it's detached. And that's why you can't separate from that which has already been detached for the purpose of tithing with that which is still attached. And if he separated teruma in this manner, violating this Mishnah, then his teruma is not teruma. Now, Rav Asi raised a dilemma before Rabbi Yochanan. What is the law if one said the detached produce of this garden bed should be teruma for the attached produce of this garden bed? Shouldn't work, right? Sounds like exactly the same case. Or if he said the attached produce of this garden bed should be teruma for the detached produce of this garden bed. Not now, but when they will be detached. And the produce was subsequently detached. That's different. So if he says, for example, in the first case of my wheat field that's half harvested, if he says, okay, I'm separating from what's already detached, teruma for it, and an additional quantity of grain that's going to serve as teruma for what? Not for the wheat that is still standing there, but for the wheat that will be lying on the ground as detached produce after I harvest the rest of my field. He's saying it's teruma for that after I harvest it. Now, those additional words do make a difference. Right, so if I say this is just to restate it, if he said the detached produce of this garden should be teruma for the attached produce of this garden bed after it will become detached, then what is the law? And Rabbi Yochanan said to him, anything that is in one's power to perform is not considered lacking in its action. Since he could theoretically detach the produce at this very moment, teruma can be separated from it. So this would work. You can say, because you're showing that you're intending to separate teruma from detached produce for detached produce, it's just lacking that detachment, but it's my produce, so it's in my power to do that whenever I want. So it sounds like then the teruma would be teruma. So that's what Rabbi Yochanan answered him, right? Okay, but then Rav Asi says, well, wait a minute. Does that really work, Rabbi Yochanan? So he raised an objection to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan from our Mishnah. With regard to one who says to a woman, you are hereby betrothed to me after I convert, or after you convert, or after I'm emancipated, or after you are emancipated, or after your husband dies, or after your sister dies, or after Yavam performs halitza with you. In all these cases, she is not betrothed. Now, how is this an objection to Rabbi Yochanan? Rav Asi explains, granted, in all of these cases but one, it is not in his power to bring about the situation when he will be able to betroth her. For example, you will be betrothed to me after you convert. Okay, well, he can't, make her convert this moment. But if he says, you will be betrothed to me after I convert, isn't it in his power to convert and become a Jew whenever he wants, right? That's what Rav Asi is saying. The matter is in his power, as he could convert now if he so chooses. According to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, any action that could potentially be performed is considered as though it has actually been performed. And the Gemara responds, in the case of this man who seeks to become a convert and who says, be betrothed to me, to this Jewish woman, he says, be betrothed to me on the condition that I will convert. Is it in his power to become a convert right now? No, it is not in his power to convert whenever he wants. Why? As Rabbi Chia bar Abba says that Rabbi Yochanan says, a convert requires the presence of 3 Jews for his conversion. He can't, magically produce 3 Jews to come and sit on his beis din, his rabbinic court, to oversee his conversion. That's not in his power to produce those people. Maybe it's not too difficult to get them to come, but it's not in his power to make sure it happens now. What is the reason for this? And what is the reason for this requirement that 3 Jews sit on his beis din? It is written with regard to a convert, you shall have one manner of law for the convert as for the homeborn. Leviticus 24:22, which indicates that a conversion is considered a judgment. You shall have one law, both for the convert and for the native born. right? One law. So if it's the same law, well, that indicates that there's judgments from a rabbinic court. And a judgment from a rabbinic court requires 3 judges. And if he requires 3 judges, well, who says that those 3 judges will be available to him whenever he wants? Since he cannot convert at a time of his own choosing, it is not considered within his power to convert. Now, just while we're here on the subject of a man converting to Judaism, I'll just share with you a few interesting aspects of this conversion. All aspects of a conversion must be performed by 3 people who are fit to serve as judges, right? This rabbinic court, this beis din, that the man converts before them, in front of them. So they have to be fit to serve as judges, not just any 3 Jews, but 3 Jews who are fit to serve as judges. And they are required to inform the prospective convert of the commandments that he must accept, right? So that's what a rabbinic court will say to the convert. Right now, you're only obligated in the 7 Noahide commandments. If you complete this conversion, you will be obligated in all the laws that Jews are obligated in. And like all other Jews, you will be held accountable for all the positive commandments that are in your power to perform and you fail to perform them, and for all the negative commandments, the prohibitions that you transgress and commit the sin, the aveira, the transgression of doing things that are prohibited. Right now, they're not prohibited or obligated on you. But if you do this conversion, you will be obligated and you will be held to account. Are you sure you want to do that? That's something the beis din has to say to the convert. Also, they have to supervise his circumcision. If he happens to be a person who was circumcised, not as a Jewish circumcision because he wasn't a Jew, but he just had the medical procedure, he's going to have to do a ritual circumcision, which is, like just a very small incision, just draw a drop of blood by a moil, but that's something that he has to do, and the beis din has to supervise that. He's also going to have an immersion in the mikveh, and these rituals must be performed during the daytime. Most authorities maintain that if a prospective convert underwent circumcision or immersion in the presence of fewer than 3 men, or if he did it at night, he is considered converted after the fact, as the requirement of a daytime court applies only, in its entirety, to the acceptance of the mitzvahs, right? So the way it should be done is that this beis din supervises that these are the commandments you're going to be obligated in, and the prohibitions that you're going to be obligated in, and the circumcision and the immersion. If the circumcision and the immersion weren't supervised by all 3 of them, then it was done wrong, but he's still going to become a convert. However, if he didn't appear before this court of 3 who told him what he's going to be obligated in, then it's not a conversion. And others claim that even in that case, the conversion is not valid and he may not marry a Jew, meaning that all 3 have to supervise all aspects of the conversion. There's many, many, many more laws and nuances to what is a valid conversion, including you have to study for a long time so you know what those mitzvahs are that are going to obligate you so you don't come to transgress them out of ignorance. And that's why there's so much study and learning and practice associated with the conversion process. Okay, but at any rate, this was brought up here because he said, you are betrothed to me on the condition that I convert. So that's not a betrothal because it is not in his power to convert right now. So he can betroth her after he converts, but he can't do it before. Rabbi Abba Bar Memel objects to this. If that is so, and anything that is in one's power to perform is not considered lacking in its action, according to Rabbi Yochanan, one who gives 1 peruta to his Canaanite maidservant and says, you are hereby betrothed to me after I emancipate you, so too will you say that it is a betrothal because he has the power to emancipate her, right? So a man can have, we don't practice slavery anymore. We haven't in thousands of years. When it was practiced, you could have either a Hebrew maidservant, a man could have a Hebrew maidservant or a Canaanite maidservant, right? If it was a Hebrew maidservant, he could betroth her and marry her, and that would automatically free her, and she would become his wife because she's a Jew and he's a Jew and they can get married. If he has a Canaanite maidservant, he cannot marry her, right? Because she's not a Jew. Now, what's interesting is a Canaanite maidservant is not entirely a non-Jew. What do I mean by that? A Canaanite slave, when they become a Canaanite slave to a Jew, when this kind of slavery was practiced in ancient Israel, that slave would have to take upon themselves certain obligations, certain mitzvahs that are not incumbent on non-Jews. So they don't become fully Jewish, but they're living in a Jewish household, and there are certain commandments that they have to undertake right away. They're obligated in more than the 7 Noahide laws. And because of that, because they're living in a Jewish household and they have to do, the mitzvahs that are incumbent on a Canaanite slave, if they are ever freed, they can become a Jew almost immediately. Almost immediately. They don't have to go through the same elaborate conversion process that a non-Jew would have to go to because they've already been living in a Jewish household for a long time. And you'll see how that affects this, right? So, but the point here is, if it's in his control to free the Canaanite slave, why can't he betroth her now? Since something that is in your control to do, it's as if you've already done it. So if that's so, why can't he betroth her even though he hasn't freed her yet and she hasn't become a Jewish woman yet? She's still a Canaanite maidservant, right? That's what's being asked here. And the Gemara rejects this suggestion. How can these cases be compared? There, the Canaanite maidservant initially had the legal status of an animal. And by an animal here, they're not saying that she's subhuman. What they're saying is she's off limits. The Jew can't marry her just like he can't marry a non-human. The Gemara, right? And there, so she doesn't have the status of someone he can marry. She is not subject to betrothal at all. Whereas now she has an independent mind, meaning once she is emancipated, right? While she's a slave, she's a slave. She doesn't have freedom to do whatever she wants with herself. Once he frees her, so she becomes a Jew, and she doesn't have to accept this betrothal, so he doesn't know whether she's going to accept the betrothal or not. It is most definitely not in his control whether she will betroth him or not. Where am I? So the Gemara answers, although he has the power, so once she has been emancipated, she has the status of a Jewish woman, and she is not considered the same person that she was when she was a Canaanite maidservant. Consequently, the attempted betrothal is certainly considered lacking in action. It's not in his control. And the Gemara asks, but that which Rabbi Oshaya says, right? What does Rabbi Oshaya say? With regard to one who gives one peruta to his wife and says to her, you are hereby betrothed to me after I divorce you. Okay, she's married to him now, so you can't betroth your wife. She's married to you now. If you divorce your wife and then she doesn't go and marry some other guy in between, you're permitted to marry her again. So can you say to your wife, okay, here's a peruta so that we are betrothed after I divorce you, right? So it's in his power to divorce her, right? He can divorce her. It's a unilateral thing. So does this work? If we're saying that the only thing that causes these other betrothals not to work is that it's out of his control, well, it's in his control to divorce his wife. Right, so Rabbi Shai says, with regard to one who gives one peruta to his wife and says to her, you are hereby betrothed to me after I divorce you. Is she betrothed for when after she becomes his divorcee? No, she is not betrothed. And so too, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. Will you say that it is betrothal because he has the power to divorce her? No. And the Gemara answers, although he has the power to divorce her, does he have the power to betroth her against her will? It is not in his power to effect this betrothal because once they are divorced, the matter is no longer dependent on him. It's dependent on him whether he's going to divorce her or not. It's not dependent on him whether she's going to remarry him. Then she's a free agent and she might not marry him. So the Gemara comments, being that it is not in his power to effect the betrothal, you can use this logic to resolve the dilemma raised by Rav Oshaya. What is the law with regard to one who gives two perutas to a woman, and with one he says to her, be betrothed to me today, And with the other, he says to her, be betrothed to me after I divorce you. Now, this is obviously so crazy and hypothetical that we're just testing our understanding of the law. Why would this ever happen? But okay, let's see if we understand the law. Right, so he says to this woman, he's not married to her, but he says, here's 2 perutas, right? That's just the minimum value, symbolic value to create betrothal. And with one, he says, be betrothed to me today. And then be betrothed to me after I divorce you. So he's telling her, we're going to get betrothed today, I'm going to divorce you tomorrow, and then we're going to be betrothed again the next day. Does any of this work? What is her status after he divorces her? Right, the first betrothal works, then he divorces her. Are they automatically betrothed already, even if she agrees to this? And the dilemma was left unanswered. And the Gemara suggests that you can resolve from here that it is not a betrothal. And the Gemara explains that this case is different. And Rav Oshaya's dilemma was actually like this. Perhaps in that situation, just as the betrothal is effective now, it is also effective afterward. Since she is currently under her own authority and agrees to betroth herself to him, it is possible that she can now consent to a betrothal that will take effect at a later time. Right? Rav Oshaya is saying, well, maybe she can consent to both of these betrothals. She's like, okay, fine, I'm in. We'll get betrothed today, divorced tomorrow, and betrothed again the next day. I agree to all of this. So would that work? And the Gemara comments, it is taught in a Baraisa in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. One may not separate teruma from the detached for the attached. And if he separated teruma, his teruma is not teruma. How so? If he said the detached produce of this garden bed will be teruma for the attached produce of the garden bed, or the attached produce of this garden bed will be teruma for the detached produce of the garden bed, he has not said anything of consequence, as the obligation to separate teruma applies only to produce after it's been detached from the ground. But if he said that the attached produce will be teruma when they will be detached, and then they become detached, then his statement is valid, as he has the power to detach them. So maybe this be betrothed to me today, divorced tomorrow, betrothed the next day, maybe that works. Moreover, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov said that even if one said, the detached produce of this garden bed will be teruma for the attached produce of this garden bed, or the attached produce of this garden bed will be teruma for the detached produce of this garden bed, when they will reach 1/3 of their growth and are detached, although at the time they had yet to ripen, which means that the obligation of terumas and tithes do not yet apply to them, when they will reach 1/3 of their growth and they are detached, then his statement would be upheld. And Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says this ruling only with regard to fodder, Fodder, the produce that has grown stalks, even if it is not yet ripe. But he did not refer to produce that is still completely soft, known as agam. Rav Yosef says he even referred to soft produce. In relation to this dispute, the Gemara asks, from where may it be inferred that this word agam is a term of growth, putzlana? And the Gemara answers that Rabbi Elazar said that this is, as the verse states, is it to bow down his head as a bulrush, ke'agmon, Isaiah 58:5, i.e. like a soft and drooping plant. So basically the issue is, can you, make a disposition about something that does not yet exist? Now, if the wheat is standing in the field, and I'm going to say, okay, what's standing in the field, I'm going to separate teruma from it after I harvest it for this produce that I've already detached, because the guy I'm selling it to is here with a wagon and I haven't harvested enough. So he's just going to take that away. I didn't separate teruma from it, even though the obligation already commenced, but I'll separate it from what's still standing after I detach it. So it would seem that would work, because first of all, he said, I'm not, talking about teruma from something that's standing in the ground. I'm talking about teruma from wheat after it's harvested. So I know I need to harvest it first. And it's my wheat. It's in my power to harvest it. So it seems like that would work. But if the wheat didn't exist yet. If he says, I will separate teruma for this wheat that I've already harvested from wheat that I'm going to plant and then harvest, that sounds like it wouldn't work because it doesn't exist yet for him to refer to it. Now the Gemara asks, in accordance with whose opinion is that which is taught in the following Baraisa? With regard to one who says to another, if your wife gives birth to a female, she is betrothed to me. He has not said anything, right? That's like what our Mishna said. And Rabbi Hanina says they taught this law only in a case where the other's wife is not pregnant. But if his wife is pregnant, his statement is upheld. Now, in accordance with whose opinion is this ruling? And the Gemara answers the Baraisa can be explained in accordance with everyone's opinion. If it is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbah, it is referring to a situation where her fetus was already noticeable, just as the stalks of fodder are recognizable. If it is in accordance with the opinion of Rav Yosef, the law of the Baraisa applies even if her fetus was not yet noticeable. And there are those who say a different version of this dispute. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says his ruling only with regard to fodder of a non-irrigated field, which is not watered, meaning it will grow anyway without me doing anything. But he did not speak about fodder of an irrigated field, since the produce of this field will not grow on its own if the person doesn't, turn on the irrigation and do the pumping and get the water into those ditches. Then it won't grow. So an action is still lacking, and that's why you can't say that you're separating teruma from that after you harvest it, because maybe it'll never reach that point. So it is not considered as if this produce has entered the world because there's too many actions lacking for it. And Rav Yosef said Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov referred even to fodder of an irrigated field, as this produce too is treated as having entered the world when it reaches the stage of fodder. I'm getting close to done. Questions or comments, please get them in. The Gemara asks, according to this version of the dispute, in accordance with whose opinion is that which is taught in the following Baraisa? If one says to another, if your wife gives birth to a female, she is betrothed to me, he has not said anything. And Rabbi Hanina says they taught this only when his wife was not pregnant. But if his wife is pregnant, his statement is upheld. Now, just saying if his wife is pregnant, we might not know if she's pregnant at the time the statement is being made. We might only realize she was pregnant at that time when she starts to show a month later, right? So they're not saying that it's known that she's pregnant. It's just that it might be that it's a valid statement even if it just turns out later that she was pregnant. Right, so Rabbi Hanina says they taught this only when his wife is not pregnant. But if his wife is pregnant, his statement is upheld. Now, in accordance with whose opinion is this ruling? The Baraisa must be referring to a case where her fetus was noticeable, and therefore everyone agrees with this ruling. The Baraisa is in accordance with the opinions of both Rabbah and Rav Yosef, as even Rav Yosef agrees that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov was referring only to fodder whose stalks were already noticeable, like a woman that's pregnant, and we can see that she's pregnant. Abaye says Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and Rebbe and Rabbi Meir all hold the following principle. A person can transfer an entity that has not yet come into the world, right? Can I sell to you a tree that's a full-grown tree before I have even planted it? Can I do that? Can I sell to you an egg that my chicken will lay tomorrow? That egg doesn't exist yet. Can I do that? Sounds like these three sages say yes, right? Eliezer ben Yaakov, Rebbe, and Rabbi Meir say a person can transfer an entity that has not yet come into the world. That is, one can perform an active acquisition for an item that is not yet in existence. So the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is referring to that which we just said, that one can separate teruma even from produce that is not yet included in this mitzvah. Now, where does Rebbe state a similar opinion, as it is taught in a Baraisa with regard to the verse, you shall not deliver a slave to his master? Rabbi Yehuda, Rebbe says, the verse is speaking of one who acquires a slave, not for the purpose of enslaving him, but in order to emancipate him. The court may not deliver the slave to this master, as this master has no right to enslave him. And the Gemara asks, what are the circumstances of this case? And Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, for example, if the new master wrote to the slave in his bill of manumission, when I will purchase you, you are hereby acquired to yourself from now, meaning retroactively from this moment. So in that case, the slave acquires himself from that moment. despite the fact that the buyer does not yet own him. And this shows that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, right, Rebbe, maintains that a person can transfer an item that has not yet entered the world, as one can emancipate his slave before he has even acquired him. You don't deliver that slave to the master because the master has already freed him. And Rabbi Meir also holds that one can transfer an entity that has not yet come into the world, as it is taught in a Baraisa, with regard to one who says to a woman, you are hereby betrothed to me after I convert, or after you convert, or after I'm emancipated, or after you emancipate, or after your husband dies, or after your sister dies, or after your Ivan performs halitza for you, she is not betrothed. That's how we learn the Mishnah. But Rabbi Meir disagrees and says she is betrothed. And Rabbi Yochanan HaSandler says she is not betrothed. So evidently, Rabbi Meir says you can create, the disposition of an asset, as it were, right? That you can create this betrothal, even when you're not permitted to do it now, but in the future when you will be permitted. But Rabbi Meir was in the minority on that view, and the law does not follow Rabbi Meir in that. That's where we'll leave off, and with God's help, we'll continue tomorrow on page 63 at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Just take a couple of questions, if there are any, on page 62. Okay, there do not appear to be questions. Okay, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow. Be safe, be vigilant, pray, learn, stand your post.